The Dark Knight. What's there to say about Batman that hasn't been said before? One of the most iconic characters in any form of media. Show the symbol to anyone across the globe and they'll have a touchstone for the Caped Crusader. His versatility makes him one of the most important characters of all time. Whether it be comic books, movies, or video games, there's a Batman out there for everyone. Spawn. Everything that Batman is, but better. Right? Okay, maybe not. Back in the early 90s, Image Comics were the new kids on the block, and they had a lot to prove. Going up against the mega comic book companies of Marvel and DC was an uphill battle that Image co-founder Todd McFarlane was determined to take on. But maybe keeping your enemies close was a strategy worth considering. In the comic book industry, big crossovers equals big money. Mostly saved for major events like Marvel's Secret Wars and DC's Crisis on Infinite Earths, these comic book hallmarks feature characters from all corners of their respective universes. But what's bigger than bringing characters across a universe together for a big team up, breaking the rules and tearing through the fabric of reality for an intercompany crossover? Superman vs. Spider-Man, RoboCop vs. the Terminator, the big one, Marvel vs. DC. These crossovers were the arguments you would have with your friends in the middle of the schoolyard, legitimized. Everyone and their grandmas would line up to see their favorite superhero prove that they are superior to the guy from the other company. Todd knew that an effective way to put his new original character Spawn on the map was by having him trade fists with an established and well-known character. And the choice was obvious. Teased in a Philadelphia convention with 2 names and 2 logos, a Batman and Spawn crossover was coming. Todd was able to secure a deal with DC, probably the same way he got into the industry in the first place.
Eventually, after 700 letters and 300 rejections, that, somebody said, okay, stop sending samples, we'll give you a job. I think that was it. I think they literally got tired of me sending them so many packages over, and they just went, give the kid a job and we won't get these packages every single month because you just keep sending us packages and he won't go away. It's like a pest. So, I was pretty diligent.
The deal was for Image and DC to each publish their own crossover one-shot, respectively titled Spawn Batman and Batman Spawn. Can I just say, I wish the title had a little bit more flair. Well, at least the DC one has the subtitle War Devil, but Spawn Batman? Or is it Spawn vs. Batman? There's a note on the first page that refers to it as Spawn vs. Batman, but everywhere else is just Spawn Batman. Those are just 2 names. What about them? I don't know. So, after securing the deal, Todd knew just the guy he needed to call to write this crossover up. In case you didn't know, Todd McFarlane is a huge Frank Miller fan, evident by the talking heads found in his Spawn comics that emulate the ones found in The Dark Knight Returns. Every time I'm reading Spawn and come across one of these pages, I let out a big sigh. I hate them. They are exhausting to read and they happen way too often. Frank Miller had not written Batman since his big time hit of TDKR, so pulling him out of retirement from Batman, so to speak, would get a lot of fans buzzing. Reluctant at first, Todd convinced Miller to write the book. Again, probably the same way he got into the comic book industry. But on one condition. Frank Miller is apparently a big fan of the NBA and how trash talking during the sport can lead to some tense competition. So he wanted to apply that to this crossover and have the 2 heroes just talk shit on each other as they fought. And boy, did he lean into that. Probably, most definitely to the book's detriment. Spawn Batman opens with the Caped Crusader going on one of his usual nightly patrols. After beating up a group of thugs, Batman comes across a shipment of high-tech weaponry, including a pair of shiny power gloves. Here's an arrow pointing at the gloves, in case you missed it. Before Batman gets a chance to investigate the rest of the scene, he gets ambushed by a giant robot crab-looking mess of a thing. Without hesitation, he makes use of the power glove he found and punches a hole in the robot. He discovers that it is encasing the decapitated head of an amnesiac. Failing to save the man's life and little evidence to go by due to the lack of appendages, Batman takes the man's head back to the Batcave and traces his origins back to New York City using his dental record. And this is where he starts to hear the rumblings of a man named Al, who has unbelievable magical abilities. But Batman is skeptical, because sure, godlike aliens, men who can run at super speed, and literal gods he can buy. But someone who can use magic? Get out of town. But it won't be long until Batman is proven wrong, for Spawn is also stalking evildoers in the deep shadows of the night. Batman witnesses Spawn set two thugs ablaze with his magic before they get a chance to do the same thing to a helpless bum. And although Spawn's actions were in defense of an innocent, Batman has no tolerance for killing. And this is where the meeting of the two vigilantes happens. One of the things that makes a crossover fun to write is putting up the contrasting elements between two characters side by side. The bright and cheery attitude of Superman juxtaposed against Batman's dark and moody tone is what's made their relationship so iconic over the years. But what's even more compelling is how their different ideologies can sometimes cause conflict, but at the end of the day they're able to come to an understanding and keep their friendship intact. On the other hand, crossing over characters just because the idea sounds cool can also be valid. The demand for Batman and Spawn crossing paths would be inevitable. You have two brooding figures that work in the shadows and have a cool cape. It's an obvious pairing. Todd McFarlane just got ahead of the game and made the crossover happen before it became a schoolyard conversation. But the interactions between Batman and Spawn reflect those you'd imagine schoolyard kids would talk about. I'll be straight with you, I haven't read a fraction of the thousands of Batman books out there, but I have a good understanding of who he is and what he's like. In this book, he is the most out of character, insane version of him I've ever seen. Batman is a relentless bully in this book. He is stubborn, unlikable, and batshit crazy. Which, yes, those traits can be found in the character throughout his many stories, but they're done with much more nuance and subtlety that make him the compelling character that he is. But here, subtlety? Nuance? Never heard of it.
Sometimes I'm more comfortable with the mask on. I don't get nightmares. I give them.
Frank Miller is known for writing Batman darker and more intense than his mainline counterpart. But here, he pushes it to a point where it starts to feel more like self-parody, going too far with inner monologues and making Batman talk almost exclusively in one-liners. I guess you can consider this the dawn of Frank Miller going over the edge with the way he writes Batman, completely losing it by the time he gets to All-Star Batman. And if you're gonna make Batman an asshole, at least make him a clever one. He uses the same insult over and over.
Punk, 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 punk. Punk, 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 punk.
There's a point where Batman is literally on his last breath and he's still shit-talking Spawn. To elevate Batman's aggression even more, Spawn is written like a total pushover. At the time of this book's publication, Spawn was still very much in his infancy as a character, set during the time where Spawn is mainly spending his time bumming around the alleyways, not really getting a whole lot done. He just wants to be left alone. He has no interest in being a crime-fighting superhero or leading Hell's Army in Armageddon. He's kinda just figuring out his place in the world, and more importantly, how to get back Wanda. But one thing is clear about Spawn. If you poke the bear one too many times, he might just teleport inside your body and punch a hole through your chest. Not a bad Xenomorph impression. Spawn lets Batman off the hook way too easily in this book. On top of all the shit talking, the back kicking, the nerve gas throwing, Spawn just goes, "Hey man, come on, why you gotta be like that?" Spawn already seems to know who Batman is as soon as he lays eyes on him, so you could say that Spawn knows all the things that Batman has done throughout his crime-fighting career and doesn't want to kill someone he knows is a good person. But I think it would have been more interesting if Spawn didn't know who this crazy guy in a bat costume was, and confused his horned devil-like silhouette for another one of Malbosia's minions, to put some real stakes in this fight. Nevertheless, Spawn holds back, but still manages to give Batman a good beating, leaving him battered, bloodied, and humiliated. You can't deny that McFarlane draws a good fight sequence. The exaggerated movements, the impacts each blow has, and the detail of debris flying everywhere makes a great spectacle. However, what doesn't work for me is his depiction of Batman. Most of the time, his face is obscured in darkness, which has been done plenty of times before and worked for the character, but here Todd draws him with big ol' eyes that take up way too much of his face and make him look too cartoony. He also goes overboard with his cape designs. One of Todd's trademarks is how exaggerated and dynamic he draws his capes, making them huge and contorting them to these crazy shapes. It works for Spawn, who is this absolute unapologetic 90s icon, but not so much Batman. There are points where his cape starts looking less like fabric and more like they're starting to take a life of their own, which is another Spawn thing. Although I'd like to point out that Todd has done his crazy cape stuff with Batman in a more elegant and fitting way. Pissed off and ready for round 2, Batman returns with the power glove he found earlier, and a more justifiable motive for wanting to face Spawn. Both heroes have been manipulated into thinking they have conflicting ideologies by this book's villain, Margaret Love, a supposed philanthropist looking to better mankind. She convinces Batman that Spawn is getting in the way of her mission to heal the world. What Batman doesn't know, but Spawn does, is that Love intends to wipe out humanity and replace them with cold-hearted machines. Al Simmons came across Margaret Love and her sick experiments in one of his many missions. When Spawn sees her on a monitor, it triggers a lost memory. In short, BVS copied SVB, and this is Jesse Eisenberg's Lex Luthor. During their second fight, a third party interrupts the brawl, a pair of Love's robots, damn near killing Batman. With no choice but to use his magic to resurrect Batman, Spawn invades his consciousness, and the heroes have a literal meeting of the minds as they exchange origin stories. Yes, this is the obligatory realization that there's a greater threat out there. Let's put our differences aside and work together. Batman's still a dick, though. For the climax of the story, the two heroes must stop a nuclear missile that Love launches as a last-ditch effort to complete her vision for a better world. There are some bits of fun banter between Batman and Spawn. My favorite is when Batman takes a jab at Spawn's chains, saying it's a wonder he can get around with those chains hanging off his costume. But again, Batman is very one-note in this book. His constant edginess and arrogance is exhausting. Spawn's supposed to be the edgelord here. I was not expecting him of all people to offer some levity. The two successfully disarm the nuke, say their goodbyes, but once again, Batman feels the need to prove himself superior and throws a batarang right at Spawn's face, which is not the cause of Spawn's shoelace face shortly after in his own comics. This caused so much confusion for me, because not only is this page pretty much replicated in issue 21 of Spawn, but Spawn explains that he got this wound from some bozo in black. Oh, so Batman, right? No, he was actually referring to Harry Houdini, whom he meets in issues 19 and 20, which were not out yet. So this led to many people speculating that the crossover between Batman and Spawn had been solidified as being canon. But no, it was just a fluke. Spawn Batman was not well received at the time of its publication. I've seen many people recount their first time reading the book and expressing how underwhelmed they were by the writing. Reading it today, the impression holds true. Seeing the two brooding heroes on the same page is a cool treat, and there is some stuff to admire in terms of artwork, but not much else. Something to point out is a note in the first page of the book explaining that this is meant to be a companion piece to The Dark Knight Returns. But as evident by the story in this book and other Miller books that are within the TDKR universe, absolutely nothing is done with that fact. This could explain why Batman is written in such an intense and angry fashion, but to me, that would detract from the Dark Knight Returns story. Batman evolved to be that relentless, violent version of himself in that story. When Batman meets Spawn here, I imagine he's younger, in his prime, and that typical version of Batman we imagine. Sometimes cold and calculative, but capable of being kind. To me, this note reads more as a selling point to put this book amongst the legendary work of Miller. A second crossover would happen with DC's own Batman and Spawn War Devil, written by Doug Moench, Alan Grant, Chuck Dixon, and art by Klaus Janson. I think many would agree that this is a vastly superior book, having a more compelling mystery and a partnership between Spawn and Batman that offers some charming moments. More on that in a future Spawntember video. Part of the deal was to make this crossover a one-time print. Todd, being the businessman that he is, made sure to print a shit ton of these. So to Frank Miller's surprise, he was still able to make a bit of money off this book years after its publication. But that also means that you can find a copy of these for almost next to nothing. The one-time publication aspect will no longer hold true when a Batman Spawn collection launches later this year, collecting the two crossovers. But the fun doesn't stop there. Just 2 months ago, Todd McFarlane made a huge announcement during San Diego Comic-Con. Batman and Spawn will cross over once again in another one-shot later this year, with Todd McFarlane reuniting with longtime Spawn artist Greg Capullo. And while the original crossover is far from being the best piece of literature, there is something undeniably exciting about seeing the two vigilantes meet again. Hopefully Batman won't be such a dick next time around. Hey guys, thanks for watching this Spawntember video. I've always wanted to do a deep dive into the notorious Spawn and Batman crossover. It's probably as bad as you think it is. I was originally gonna include the Batman and Spawn War Devil comic, but I figured I could make that into its own video, perhaps paired with the upcoming Spawn and Batman crossover for next year. As always, if you have any Spawn tint to share, don't forget to tag me on Twitter and use the hashtag Spawntember. I want to shout out the Four Snakes video on Spawn comic book covers that pay homage to famous comic book covers throughout history, and vice versa. There's a bunch that even I didn't know existed, and it's overall just a really fun video. I also want to give a shout out to my buddy Maddie, who is, much like last year, sharing pictures of collectible Spawn cards on a daily basis. So he's doing a lot of the legwork when it comes to keeping the Spawntember spirit alive throughout the month. Thanks for that, Maddie. You're an absolute treasure and I love you. Don't forget to subscribe, like the video, and tell me what you think of the Spawn and Batman crossover. Once again, thanks for watching, happy Spawntember, and I'll see you guys next time.